Welcome back to Bourbon on the Brain, and today I'm going to try something kind of cool. Um, we're going to be taking a look at this article that VinePair posted, and as you can tell by the title, it's we asked 15 bartenders what's the best bourbon for beginners, and I'm going to be giving my assessment of their choices. So they poll a bunch of different bartenders and determine what they think is the best one, and I'm gonna see if I agree with some of the choices, disagree with some of the choices, and I'm gonna add in a couple of bottles that I think are some good options as well. Now, all of this is property of VinePair. We have no relationship or anything like that. I'm just going to be taking a look at it and giving my opinions about it as somebody that reads their blogs from time to time. So we're gonna go from there. So, the first thing that they have is basic Woodford Reserve. Now, basic Woodford Reserve is sort of what it is. It's a little bit overpriced. It's got a really good reputation, really good quality for what it is. You're probably looking at about the $40 price range for it, depending on where you're going. Your local supermarket might have it for a little bit less. It's a little bit more of a high-end beginner's bourbon in terms of reputation, not necessarily in terms of taste. I like it, but honestly, for the price, there are other things that I would rather get if I'm going to be spending that much on a bourbon that I might be drinking straight, but I also might be mixing. So it really just depends. The thing that I tend to look for is a lot of bars will use Woodford as their kind of high-end selection. And to me, it's not a high-end selection. It's a beginner bourbon. And that speaks to its reputation, but not necessarily its taste. So for me, it's a good reputation bourbon, but it doesn't necessarily align with the quality that I would want for the price that it's coming in at. So next we have Maker's Mark. So if you follow my channel, you know that I've done quite a few reviews on Maker's Mark. I do enjoy Maker's Mark, with the caveat that I do not enjoy their just regular Maker's Mark whiskey. It's just really basic. I don't really know how else to sum it up more than that. Is it cheap? Yes. Does it have a reputation? Yes. Is it pretty much in every bar in America? Yes. But for me, that's not a beginner bourbon. That's just, that's like ordering a Jack and Coke if you want something that tastes a little bit like whiskey and a little bit like Coke. There's nothing more to it. It's just very basic. And so if somebody were to come to me and say, hey, beginner bourbon, this is my budget, what do you recommend? It wouldn't be on my list. It's just so basic and so obvious. It's just it doesn't make it on my list. Elijah Craig Small Batch. Now this is an interesting one. I am a fan of Elijah Craig. Elijah Craig is a very large distillery that kind of behaves like a smaller distillery, and they have a lot of really interesting choices out there in terms of price and in terms of release and in terms of just they have a wide variety of stuff out there. They're very interesting. And they're very public about the different mash bills that they use as well as the different batches that they release. And I am a fan of Elijah Craig. Elijah Craig tends to be just ever so slightly more expensive than something like a Maker's Mark. And it's got a good reputation. I would consider Elijah Craig to be not necessarily on my short list for beginner bourbon, but I wouldn't have a problem if somebody were to recommend Elijah Craig as like a really first entry step into bourbon. It's a lineage distillery, which means it's been around for a very long time. It's got a very good reputation, and it's got room to grow inside of its own distillery in terms of options that you can grow into and expand your palate. So I would say this is definitely a solid beginner's bourbon. And next we have Four Roses. So Four Roses is a little bit of a double standard. Their basic Four Roses is It's not for me. I'm gonna be honest. It lacks a lot of flavor, and if you're going to dive into the world of Four Roses, the first thing that I think you should pick up is their single barrel. They're going to end up paying a little bit more than a beginner bourbon price in the ballpark of between $50 and $60. But in terms of palate and in terms of introduction to bourbon, especially a little bit more of a higher proof bourbon, it's really hard to go wrong with their single barrel. And I just don't think their regular Four Roses does justice to the quality that the distillery puts out. And it can give the wrong impression in terms of that quality. And so while I'm a very big fan of Four Roses, I have a couple different editions of their limited releases. They're just regular Four Roses. I wouldn't put it on this list. That doesn't mean it's not a good bourbon for certain people, and it's a good mixing bourbon. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I would use it as a mixer, but I wouldn't do it as an intro in terms of just drinking bourbon straight and neat. Angel's Envy. So this is a really, really good beginner's bourbon for a number of reasons. One, they consider themselves a craft distillery. By definition, I guess technically they are. I don't really consider them a craft distillery, but everything they do, a lot of what they do is they finish in port casks. Now, if you're familiar with port, you know it's very sweet. And so it takes off a little bit of the edge from that bourbon, harsh bourbon taste. And so in terms of an entry bourbon and a beginner's bourbon, this is a fantastic beginner's bourbon. Now, it is going to be a little bit more expensive than some of the beginner bourbons that we've gone over. Your starting price is going to be in that $40 to $60 range, especially if you start getting single barrel releases. But it is a fantastic beginner's bourbon, and it mixes very well, and it's got a really cool bottle design with some story behind it, and it is a very, very good bottle to sort of get your feet wet in the bourbon world. It kind of has a little bit of everything. The only downside to it is it doesn't have a lot of room to grow in terms of internally at the distillery. They have their sort of limited releases that are really, really hard to get a hold of and typically very expensive. And so that is the only downside. It doesn't provide a lot of room to grow inside of the distillery and discover more things with similar mash bills and tasting profiles. But overall, a great beginner's bourbon. W.L. Weller. So, here's the thing with this. This would be a very interesting beginner's bourbon, with the caveat that you can't get it for less than $150. Now, the MSRP is in line with what you would consider a beginner's bourbon in that it's much less, but you can't get this for anything under $150 and probably even more than that. Fantastic bourbon. Easily inside my top 10 all time in terms of bottles that I own or have tried. But definitely not a beginner's bourbon in the current bourbon marketplace right now. It's a very good, I would say, collector's bourbon to try and enjoy and have in your cabinet and show off. And it makes a really good last bottle or two in a tasting lineup. But beginner bourbon, it is not. It is a wheated bourbon, which means it's going to be very different from a typical bourbon or whiskey profile. And it definitely doesn't belong on a beginner bourbon list. Not because of quality. The quality is fantastic. It's Weller. I mean, the name speaks for itself. But in the current marketplace, as it exists right now, there's no way that you're going to get this as a beginner's bourbon and be comfortable with it. Basil Hayden. All right, I'm going to keep it really short and sweet with Basil Hayden. I'm not a fan of Basil Hayden. It's not the quality is bad. I just don't enjoy the taste. Everybody's got different tasting notes, different things that they're comfortable with and things that they enjoy. I'm not a fan of Basil Hayden. I admit that I am biased on that, and I will own that. I really enjoy their some of their limited releases. Their 10-year is pretty good. They have a rye that I enjoy, but they're just basic Basil Haydens. I don't enjoy. I would not recommend it as a beginner's bourbon for people that have similar tasting senses as I do. And I'm going to leave it at that. I don't want to insult them because they don't deserve to be insulted. They make a good quality product. Just, I don't enjoy it. Evan Williams. I've been to this distillery actually. There's a couple on here that I've been to. The Evan Williams 1783 is a 90 proof. Says it right off the bat. It's decent quality. It's decently priced. It's decent tasting. It's just a very decent bourbon. The one nice thing about Evan Williams, not the one nice thing, but one of the nice things that I enjoy about Evan Williams is that even at their lowest release, in terms of like at their beginning releases, the thing with them is there's room to grow. They have a ton of different releases. I have their Square 6. I love it. It's a high rye. It's fantastic. Some of their single barrel releases are fantastic. The quality that they put out is very good, and so it does give you room to grow in terms of a beginner's bourbon. It's an overall good quality bourbon. It's not going to blow you away. It's not going to knock your socks off. It might not even leave you clamoring for more, but it's going to give you a good foothold into the understanding of what bourbon is, and to me, that's what a good bourbon is. It's something that gives you a foothold into understanding the taste, the nose, the body, all of those things, and it definitely does that. Next we have Old Forester. So just like with Basil Hayden, I was a little bit biased. I'm going to be a little bit biased towards Old Forester, but in the opposite direction. I'm a very large Old Forester fan. Their 1910, I think, is one of the best bang for your bucks bourbons that you can buy, bar none. I just bought a bottle of their 1924 limited release that they just put out. I have probably 7 or 8 different releases of Old Forester. I'm in the process of trying to collect their entire Whiskey Row series. Very, very good bourbon. Now, I believe it's an 86 proof. It's famous, the Old Forester 86. It is a little bit lower of a proof, but overall a good quality mash bill. They have a very sterling reputation. It is a very good beginner's bourbon. It's not going to blow your pants away. It's definitely not going to blow your wallet away. Just an overall very good quality bourbon for the price. You can drink it neat, on the rocks, mix it. It'll hold consistently no matter what you do. And to me, it's just very enjoyable. I actually don't have a bottle of this. One of my friends does. And between 3 of us, we actually finished an entire bottle of this in one night. And with a little bit of water mixed in over the course of the night of drinking, no hangover the next day. Which I found very interesting. Never had that experience before. It was a little bit eerie. But a very good quality bourbon for the price and a good entry bourbon into the world of bourbon. Next, we have the Hudsen Whiskey Bright Lights Big Bourbon. So, this is a very, I keep saying interesting because it's the only word that I can think of that's so diverse in terms of its meaning. Obviously, it's a New York bourbon. The thing with Hudsen whiskey is it's actually relatively new to the scene. I enjoy Hudsen whiskey. I'm not in love with it, but I do enjoy it. It just, for me, it's not something that comes to mind when I think of, like, if I were to recommend an entry-level bourbon to somebody, this would not have ever come to mind, to be completely honest. I could have listed 300 bourbons, and this never would have dawned on me to recommend as a beginner's bourbon. Not because of the quality, it's just, it doesn't strike a tone of something that I would say, hey, this is a particular feature of this that would make you open your eyes when you're trying bourbon for the first time or just kind of getting into it. It's not a knock on it. It's just it to me, it doesn't strike beginner's bourbon chords. It's good. I recommend trying it, but not as a beginner's bourbon. So that's really, for me, that's all there is to it for that. And I believe finally we have the Wilderness Trail Single Barrel Wheated. So I enjoy Wilderness Trail. I think they put out a very good product. I think they might be slightly overpriced, especially their single barrel. I believe their single barrel is 100 proof, and I personally am not a huge fan of single barrels that have a consistent proof. I enjoy when distilleries release single barrels, and each edition that they release, the proof is a little bit different on each one. And the reason why is because they're not forcing a bourbon to fit into a specific channel to meet specific requirements. Henry McKenna does a phenomenal job of that. Each of their releases is a different proof, but the overall taste and quality is the same. You might get slightly different tasting notes here and there, but the quality remains stellar. And I'm a big fan of Wilderness Trail. I think their product is very good. But for me, some of it lacks a little bit of originality in terms of some of that wow factor. And for a single barrel, I do need a little bit of wow factor. It wouldn't necessarily be a beginner bourbon that I would recommend right off of the bat. It would be something that I would probably recommend as you start to delve a little bit deeper, especially because it is a single barrel wheated and a little bit of a higher proof than people might be accustomed to. But I do think it is a very good quality bourbon, and I would recommend trying it if you can get your hands on it. I believe that's it. Oh, one more. So lastly, we have Knob Creek 9-year. I do enjoy Knob Creek, and actually this is a fantastic beginner's bourbon. It's a little bit different than some of the other bourbons we've recommended. Knob Creek is known for their sort of smoky flavors. In fact, they have a smoked bourbon that they have regularly available. It's not super expensive. The quality speaks for itself. I'm a big fan of the wax on the bottle. It is 100 proof, so it's going to be a little bit more powerful than some of the other beginner bourbons on this list, but I think it's a very good option as a beginner. And as I've mentioned, this is a distillery that you do have room to step up in. I think they have a 10-year, they have a 15-year, they have an 18-year, I think they have a 12-year, they have a smoked, they have a maple. It's a distillery that's very diverse. It's a fairly big name distillery. I would say this is a very good beginner's bourbon. It really does the job nicely. So, with that being said, a couple of beginner bourbons that I would recommend. Old Grandad Bottled in Bond. It is a fantastic beginner's bourbon. It goes down very smoothly. It's about $20. It's readily available at most supermarkets and most liquor stores. If I can get it readily available in California, it's pretty good odds that it's readily available pretty much any place else. It's one of my go-tos when I'm bringing people over for the first time, trying bourbon. It kind of gives them that basic introduction. And if you're familiar with Old Grandad, it's now owned by Jim Beam, but it used to be a very storied distillery. And I do very much enjoy it. So that's one of my go-tos. The other thing that I recommend is if we're going to get a little bit more up in price, which some of these are, so I feel comfortable saying that, the Old Forester 1910 is a fantastic intro bourbon as well as a fantastic experienced drinker's bourbon because of how smooth it is and how well it goes down. The taste profile is expansive. It's readily available, and it's a fantastic, fantastic drinking bourbon, whether for mixing or otherwise. And for me, those are kind of the two that I recommend going towards when we're really just first stepping into bourbon. The other one that I might recommend is the small batch from Garrison Brothers. Really good quality, really good care. You can really taste the effort that goes into it. And then the last one that I'd recommend would probably be the 6-year Whistle Pig. Same thing. You can really taste the care. You can really taste the amount of effort that goes into crafting it. It's got quite a few different tasting notes, and it gives you sort of an ability to step around and try different things because they do release limited releases all the time. So those are kind of my 4 go-to that I'm going to recommend. I think this is a fairly decent list. it wouldn't be something that I would send to somebody and say, hey, try these. I would rather put together my own list based off of certain categories like budget, availability, and proof. But as a whole, I'm okay with the list. I don't love it, but I don't hate it. So let me know what you think below. I'm curious to hear if you agree with me, if you don't agree with me, if you've tried any of these things. Let me know. As always, enjoy, drink safely, and we'll catch you next time. Bye for now.